Hi, I'm Paul Calow. I've been a Tenchfishers member for about 9 years now, and today I'm going to talk you through my tench fishing tackle box. Okay, so where should we start? One of the most important things for me in my tench fishing is marker elastic, using distance sticks and clipping up on the spot, and I use the marker elastic to ensure that I'm hitting the exact same spot every time I'm casting. So I've got a couple of types of marker elastic, some hook link material. When I do use braid, coated braid, I tend to use this stuff. What else have we got in here? Got some 8-pound line, which I use for rotten bottoms on my heli rigs. Having a rotten bottom really helps to improve fish safety and to land those fish when they get themselves into the weed, because the feeder will break off, but the hook link will keep fishing. I don't use fluorocarbon very often at all, to be honest, as hook link material. Not in my tench fishing anyway, but I do have some just in case I want to have something a bit more aggressive. Usually when I'm maggot fishing, it does give you a nice aggressive turn where the knotless knot is tied on the hook. You get like a nice sharp sort of angle. What's this? This is one of my wife's hairbands that I use. I sort of double wrap it around the handle of my rods, and it stops the rods from sliding forwards if I get normally a carp picks up my bait and runs off with the rod. It's just an extra bit of security. It helps me more quickly and efficiently place my rods in the butt rest as well, because I've got a marker for lining everything up nicely, because I'm a bit of a OCD man when it comes to my buzzers and alarms and rod setup. A couple of boxes of different anti-tangle sleeves. I've got small ones, larger ones, some tungsten putty for hook links, and sometimes we're putting up the line above a inline feeder just to pin things down a little bit. I've got my Tenchfishers badge that I take with me. That's the region I'm in. We're divided into regions in Tenchfishers, and I think most regions have got a personalised badge. Very collectible, just very nice to have. I've got a pellet banding jobby, I don't know what it's actually called, for expanding the bands. I use this when I'm using fake maggots. I've got some fake maggots made up from boiler mix that Darren at the Hookbait Company has done for me, which I use on my club lake, which doesn't allow any plastics or foam. So to pop up my maggots, I'm using this this bander and inserting one of the pop-up mix boilie maggots into the bait band, and that enables me to fish the same way that I would if I was using a bit of foam or a plastic maggot. I've got a few flying back lids here, which I use occasionally in swims that aren't too weedy. And these are a couple of pellet cones that I don't really use for my tench fishing so much. I use them a little bit when I'm crucian fishing, but they're kind of just in there because sort of a lot of the crucian and tench stuff is pretty interchangeable. Selection of different size boilie stops. What are these, sinkers to put between the hook and the lead or the feeder. Normally if I'm fishing with a stripped braid hook link, I'll use those. Lots of hooks. I normally tend to use Gardner Talon tips. Size 12 is what I normally use. I will use the size 14 if I really feel the need to. I'm not sure they do Talon tips in size 14, hence the target specific beak points. But I like a beak point because it protects the sharpness of the point, I find. Size 10s, really great hooks, strong, nice shape. And then in the bottom here I've got some Hellerman tubing, and if you've watched any of the other videos on Tenchfishers TV, our YouTube channel, you'll see that there are a few demos of how to use Hellerman tubing to make safer heli rigs. And you'll see that most of the Hellerman tubing that's used in those rig demos is H12 diameter. So I've got myself a bag of that, and I use that. I use that a lot for making my beads, heli beads. But I'll come to those in a minute. I just wanted to mention these other hooks that I occasionally use. These are kind of like sort of Nash ready-made sort of Ronnie type hooks. You can see there's a swivel with a large ring attached to it already. I'll put a bit of shrink tubing or silicone over there, and then I'll fish these on lead core as a chod for tench. So, you know, relatively small hook, fish directly onto the lead core when I'm chod fishing, a light lead, sort of 1 ounce, 1.5 ounces. And that works well for me on my club lake. In some of the swims, it's a very weedy lake, and sometimes I want to creep around from swim to swim and just drop baits in where I see signs of tench fizzing or rolling, and I don't want to disturb the swim too much, so I'll just drop a chod on it. Normally I'm using popped up maggots on that chod rig, using a bit of a sort of whittled down pop-up boilie and some maggots in a kind of Medusa rig, rather than using pop-up boilies. But yeah, they're quite handy hooks to use if scaled down carp methods like the chod rig are of interest to you. Let's just put those back. What else have we got? We got this is my bits and pieces section. Glue. I quite like this gel glue for sticking maggots to bits of foam or plastic casters together, or even real casters together. Sticking casters to pop-up boilies, all that kind of stuff. So glue is really helpful, and I find that the Gorilla Super Glue Gel is probably the better one that I like anyway. Some disgorgers. I mean, I've got forceps in a separate bag. A lighter for, you know, blobbing, if I'm using a slip D rig or something like that, which is very rare, but I do use them sometimes. Syringe for inflating worms, various baiting needles. If you're fishing worms and worm kebabs and using quick stops, these little spiky needles, not really a needle, it's more a spike, they're pretty helpful in pushing the quick stop through the worms. A loop tire, which I've got in my box because well, Digribble tells me I should be using them, but I can't get to grips with it. I keep trying, I keep working it out, and then I forget about it. But if you want a rig box that has very consistent hook links in it, one of these is, I'm sure, very, very helpful if you can work out how to use the goddamn thing. Various sort of tensioners and knot pullers, that kind of thing. I've got a spare bank stick camera adapter. A couple of sharpening stones for hooks. There's like a gardener sharpening file. My favourite hook link material for heli rigs is an old thing. I'm running out of it now. It's the Corum Expert Power Mono. It's got a lovely colour to it, and it's got a lovely sort of texture to it as well. And I stocked up on it before it went out, before they stopped making it. So I've got a few spools of the 10 and the 8. Super floss. I mean, I only really use that on those Ronnie type rigs occasionally. Stripped hook link, very, very narrow diameter. Use it occasionally. I tend to use coated braid more than uncoated braid, really. And then here's a load of little bits and pieces, various bits of terminal tackle. So I'm looking here. So we got bits of foam for popping up worms and maggots on lakes that allow the use of foam and plastics. Spare O-ring, pellet bands. The smaller ones are the ones I tend to use quite a lot on using the fake maggots made out of pop-up mix that Darren does for me. Some tail rubbers. I don't tend to use lead clips all that much in my tench fishing, but I do use them to go over the quick change links that I use on my heli rigs, just to kind of make them a bit less tangle prone. So I slide that over the link at the bottom of the rotten bottom. Cork again for popping stuff up. These are maggot clips. I use those occasionally, not so often, if I'm honest. I tend to prefer using the method where you use a smaller hook and push it into your bit of foam or your bit of plastic to make a Medusa rig, rather than using leg clips like that, but they do work. What else we got? They're just like tiny micro swivels. Putting boilies onto slip D rigs. That's a spare nubbin for the deeper, a few sort of hook beads, rig rings that I use to attach to the main line, and then I attach the rotten bottom onto the rig ring. What else have we got in here? There's the quick stops for the worm kebab. Quick links that I use to attach the feeders to the rotten bottom. A few beads for running rigs that I don't use so much in my tench fishing. Tulip beads I use quite a bit on method feeders and on leads in PVA bags to create a semi-bolt effect. So not fully fixed, don't really use fixed rigs anymore. But sometimes you do want a sort of semi-fixed rig that you know is going to be safe if it gets snagged. So those tulip beads I find really helpful because they push nicely into inline feeders and inline leads. And then the beads at the top there I use on method feeders when I don't want a semi-fixed rig, I want a running rig. Lots of beads. There's a real push within the Tenchfishers at looking at rig safety, and especially heli rigs. And so I've been doing quite a lot of experimenting with various fish safe heli beads and heli kits. I've essentially done away with using a float stop for the top stopper above the hook link, because they don't move, and if you break off above the rig, the fish isn't going to be able to shift that hook link and get that hook link off the main line that it's tethered to. So I've been looking at alternatives, as have the rig safety group within the Tenchfishers. The one I've kind of landed on is either using some Hellman tubing or using the Corda naked shod kit. These are old Corum heli rigs. But here's an example of one of the Hellman rigs. Sort of in effect, this was given to me by Chris McKechnie, who kind of came up with the idea as one of the pioneers of the idea. But essentially you've got a bit of size 8 pole elastic in Hellman tubing, and that acts as a top bead in a replacement for a float stop. But it moves much more easily up the main line and will totally stop fish getting tethered if there's a break off above the hook link. So like I say, I'm still learning about all this Hellman stuff, but the rigs I'm using use that now as the top stop in most cases. And I can use these Corum heli kits, I just don't use the top float stop. I replace them with one of these Hellman beads that move much more freely, and that sort of makes it safe. What else do we have? Various swivels. Yep, so I'm using these on direct onto lead core to create a kind of mini chod, mini pop-up rig on lead core. Using these, I think these solar ones, are for PVA bags. So you can slide the knot of your PVA bag into that loop and slide it down the channel, and it securely holds a PVA bag. So they're quite handy. Regular swivels, swivels with large rings, which I use with inline feeders and those tulip beads that I showed earlier to give a semi-fixed rig. I use these if I'm fishing popped up baits because it gives free movement. That ring means that hook link comes off the feeder and goes sort of straight up, rather than if you're using a anti-tangle sleeve, it's kind of pushing the hook link away from the feeder and it's wanting the hook link to lay flat. I don't want that if I'm popping it up. I want it to go perpendicular from the feeder, so I use those rig rings. And then there's various hard and soft beads that I use for various rigs, and the Drennan swivel beads that I use on my heli rigs as well. So that's the tackle box. I have got some feeders out as well to show you. I use these feeders all for heli rigs. These Preston ones fly like bullets. They're quite handy. These ones hold a lot of chop worm, worm cast, ground bait, chop worm, worm cast, ground bait again. They hold a lot, so they're really good. They're good for maggots as well. If you're fishing heli rigs with maggots, again, they hold loads and loads of maggots, so you don't have to recast quite as often. These are all my sort of longer range feeders that I use, window feeders, Preston window feeders in different sizes. They, again, fly like bullets, all the weights up front. Same with these Drennan feeder bombs that I use a lot. Again, the weights up front, so they cast really nicely on a heli rig. And then on my local club lake, I tend to use these inline feeders a lot more. And if I'm fishing over sort of gravel beds, I tend to use these Drennan ones. I might cut holes and make the holes bigger, so when I reel in, it helps to deposit any leftover material from the feeder onto the spot. Some of them, you can see I use camo tape, or I've got some electrician's tape in the box as well that I use to, well, camouflage, but also to slow down the speed at which the maggots come out of the feeder. And then I have started also for inline feeder fishing using these Coram ones on my club lake, because there's quite a lot of swims that have quite dark silty bottoms, and I prefer these just because they blend in a lot more. It's not really to do with how they're delivering the bait, it's more to do with the colour of them. I just think they work better in that environment, so I'm using these now, and they do a great job. And then finally, I'll just very quickly go through some of the leads that are in my lead pouch. A couple of sort of marker leads that I use to not just, test the depth, but to find clear spots more than anything. They're both pretty useful for that. I don't use a marker float all that much these days. I tend to rely on using leads, finding a clear spot, and then I'll fish happily over a spot that feels relatively clear or clearer than the surrounding area. If I'm using lead core with like chod rigs and little pop-up type rigs, I'm using small leads like this. There's various different small leads in there, but I'm using sort of ounce to an ounce and a half normally. And then I've got a few of these inline leads that I tend to use in PVA bags. I don't use PVA bags all that much, but again, quite handy when casting to showing fish. That's just if I want to fish a chod rig a little bit further out. But there you have it. That's my Tench box, and like many of us, we've all got probably different boxes for different species of fish, and I'm constantly moving things backwards and forwards between boxes, but in essence that is pretty much my Tench gear. So hope you've found it interesting, and enjoy your fishing.